Ray, Pete, Georgie Dinkov, how are you guys? Ray, how are you?
Very well.
And Georgie Dinkov?
Not bad, surrounded by more National Guards than I've ever seen in my life, but things are still, I guess, under control. No civil war yet.
Yeah, what are there, 25,000 troops in D.C. right now? It's more than that, right?
That's just the National Guard. There's the place is teeming with I would say civilian and undercover cops, or all kinds of, state police. I don't even know what agency they belong to, but it's pretty obvious they're some kind of a law enforcement because they have guns and, the first sign of commotion, because the protests are continuing even after Biden got installed. But you can see these people are police because they have guns, and as soon as something happens, they pull out their badges. So there's more law enforcement on the street than there's people at this point.
I'm sure we'll get into that more. But Ray, we haven't chatted in about a month or so. Where is the most important place to start? Do you think? What's the most critical information to chat about?
That nothing new has indicated that there's a pandemic or epidemic at all.
Well, have you seen the news? Yeah, go ahead. I was going to say, have you seen the news of the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines? How many people started suddenly dying in Norway and in Israel? And basically the effectiveness that they claim is there. Now, apparently it's not. 12,000 people in Israel immediately got infected after getting vaccinated.
And in one county of New York, which had been free of the so-called virus for a whole month, I think it was on the 22nd of December, vaccination started in one nursing home. They vaccinated 198 old people, and in, I think it was only about 2 weeks, 23 or 24 of those had died.
Wow.
And that is a huge statistical indication that the nursing home people said, well, they had a local epidemic of the virus that happened to kill only the vaccinated people.
Do you think they're dying from the lipid adjuvant, or they're dying from the actual mRNA operating system?
I think it's the adjuvant, and no one is talking about that.
And that's
I think they falsely labeled it as a carrier for the RNA when those same things have been sold for years as adjuvants.
So the RNA aspect of the vaccine is less dangerous than the polyethylene glycol lipid adjuvant?
I would guess so.
Yeah, well, that's almost like that's pretty wild.
But for long range possibility of having the RNA for making the spike protein, which creates inflammation, if we become permanent factories for inflammation proteins, that isn't a good thing.
Did you see the news about the Australian vaccine? I mean, it's already been terminated, but it contains a portion of the HIV virus. And as soon as they started giving it to people started testing HIV positive. So they freaked out. They shut down the vaccine. They said, "Don't worry, it's not causing HIV infection." But I thought maybe they're concerned that okay, so you have only two choices: either the vaccine causes HIV infection, or the tests that are detecting HIV positive people are useless, because what about all these other people that were detected HIV positive that didn't get the vaccine? So which one should we pick?
Yeah, it's nice that their fraud is being put to the test.
And now Lynn Wood, this lawyer here in the United States, is saying that apparently some of his friends that got vaccinated with the Pfizer vaccine, which shouldn't contain any HIV particles, are also testing HIV positive. Do you think that maybe because of the mRNA somehow activating our internal retrovirome, and that's what's causing the positive tests?
And remember, what's his name? The French Nobel Prize winner.
Oh, Montagnier.
Yeah. he claimed that he identified some HIV in the stretch of RNA that's used.
So basically, any mRNA vaccine that includes mRNA from the coronavirus, at least this one, it has a chance of triggering an HIV positive test, or even worse, basically a chronic, HIV infection.
Yeah. I agree with Peter Duesberg, though, that there has never been any evidence that such a virus causes the AIDS condition.
Right, but it's in any case, it's probably not a positive sign that the retrovirome is activated by this vaccine.
What will activate a positive test, it might only take a stretch of 2 or 3 nucleotides to be indicating a similarity to the HIV virus.
For the PCR test, if its sensitivity is cranked up all the way to the max, I think right now they're using 40 cycles or something like that for the coronavirus. If you crank it up even more, can you come up with a basically positive test for pretty much any virus? Because they're so similar. I mean, there's probably an overlap of at least 10% across all viruses, isn't there?
Yeah, I think they ordered people to test all across the country using that many turns of the cycle, because they knew it would create supposed evidence of a big epidemic. But I'm sure that if they can get a large number of people vaccinated, then they're going to change the instruction, go back to actually measuring something rather than producing false positives for it, and use that to claim that the virus eliminated the epidemic.
Probably one of the darkest things I've read, I don't know if we've talked about it on the show before, but the idea that, if you deny a vaccine, you don't want to be a guinea pig for an 8-month experimental new technology vaccine, you'll be labeled as a public health threat, or a domestic terrorist, you're a contagion. And there's news trickling out. I'm sure you saw it, Ray. There's some paper in New York about being held against your will in a COVID camp. So pretty depressing, but you think that's where this stuff will that will be part of this whole thing, is taking people and gathering them together that refuse to get vaccinated.
They're already doing something like that with having the communication websites censor, prevent those people from posting.
People in the camps can't post?
No, I mean the general public is being designated effectively a domestic terrorist if they want to post dissenting information. And that was one of Biden's proposals, to have a new category of domestic terrorism. So the government could enforce all of the internet to identify these domestic terrorists and keep them from posting anywhere.
We don't have to dwell on it too much, but what is your rundown of the Trump situation of Biden? I'm sure you're aware of QAnon and them being some kind of, I don't know, people suspect it was a psychological operation, possibly from Israel or something. But what is your, do you think at this point, the Capitol stuff, was Trump in on it? Was he not who he said he was, or was he just opposing a power elite that was in complete control?
Yeah, he had the good points, but sometimes he got carried away. And I think QAnon might need a psychological operation himself.
Did you, when you first got whiff of that, did you smell fraud?
Yeah,
Yeah.
or a lack of a sense of reality, basic cultism, and lack of critical thinking. Some guy named Ward, I forget his name, people are swallowing the strange things that he says. 2 or 3 days later, they haven't happened, and he comes up with a new explanation, and they keep swallowing it time after time, as if their memory lasts only 2 days.
Well, on YouTube, I followed several channels that really detailed kind of Zionist activities, and they were being obliterated off YouTube. And those QAnon channels were getting like hundreds of thousands of views, and they weren't being censored at all. And so, of course, now that has changed a little bit, but it definitely seemed like they wanted people to get into that. So some people were speculating, was that whole ruse to fulfill the prophecy of white, nationalist, Christian, domestic terrorists now? Because there's Whitney Webb and other people have been getting sound clips. I forgot the woman's name, but basically saying that this whole phase of this whatever is happening right now is going to be turned on domestic terrorists, like similar to what we did to Al Qaeda or whatever.
Yeah, and promoting the crazies on the other side is going to give more backing to the dissenters, the crazy supporters of authoritarianism are being supported by the official government side, where the dissenters are the ones who will be susceptible to incarceration for their belief.
Yeah, and Whitney also pointed out that like they're trying to group Jeffrey Epstein, like people that are interested in that with QAnon and like Sandy Hook and 9/11. So they're trying to like group all these things together. And so to an average person, they hear any of these words and they immediately dismiss it because they've had such a bad taste in their mouth from the constant press again of QAnon, which has been so popularized over the mainstream news channels.
Mm-hmm.
George, do you have any questions? I was going to try to go as far as possible, and we can talk about this and everything else, and then we can get into user questions, Ray. But like, my main question was, does this go back to kind of the 200 years ago Battle of Waterloo and kind of how the Rothschilds formed their fortune, and then the industrialists, the Rockefellers, and things like that? Is that an effective way of understanding how we arrived here?
I think so, and the one strand of culture that is coming out in insane ways in the last several years of getting emails on the internet. I've had only maybe half a dozen really insane sounding people, but just in the last week I've had more letters like that than all 20 years that I've used the internet. People saying that numerology, blaming numerology on the Jesuits, even though it originated in the Old Testament with, in the beginning there was the Word, and the Word was with God. The tradition, the Jewish Kabbalah, in particular, promoted and amplified this essentialist idea that the Hebrew, God spoke Hebrew, and so every letter and word of Hebrew is a coded message from God, and people like Noam Chomsky studied the Kabbalah as a kid, and that says that you can assert anything that numerology confirms, and you don't need any real world evidence because at least the Hebrew word is with God and defines reality. And Chomsky used it to bypass the people who wanted to explain language as a matter of the brain dealing with the world. And he said, no, you don't need any evidence at all. The way you get a scientific view of language is to treat the person and the brain as an absolute black box. Don't try to look for any information coming from the people who use language and experience it constantly, because the only thing that counts is this word-derived reality. And so if you don't have words, you can't think. For example, he was saying that my dogs, and I think he called them canines, don't understand what I'm saying because they have no words. They can't understand anything. But then he explains that he used the word canine because if he spoke the word dog, they would make the wrong conclusion that he wanted to do something with them. So he demonstrated that they are thinking and would draw a mistaken conclusion if he suddenly started using the word dog. But then he denied that thought is possible without words, and that since thought defines mental being, basically humans are the only ones that count because they can, if they work at it, they can identify the numbers that define the essences of reality. A deep scientific heresy cutting out empiricism, and that's what I see as the greatest danger happening now, that there's everyone is being discouraged from looking for evidence, and that forces you to rely on the experts and whoever is running the cult of the time.
Wasn't there a campaign of mass sterilizations in the U.S. For people who were deaf and couldn't speak? So the assumption was that these people were mentally retarded, and that's why they sterilized them so they couldn't reproduce.
Yeah, I had a professor who said you don't have to worry about anesthesia when you're operating on an animal. It's screaming. It isn't words, and so it can't say stop cutting and murdering me. So nothing is happening.
So maybe they should try, plug in that professor's mouth and operate on him, and if he can't say stop, then he's not feeling pain either.
Yeah, it was actually I was a psychology major for a year, and one of my professors, and a young and progressive one, the most progressive in the department, said that babies' brains aren't mature until they're about a year and a half old, and so they can't speak or feel pain. Therefore, you don't need anesthesia if you circumcise them. And far beyond that, circumcision has been practiced without anesthetic.
Were you saying that the Rothschilds were motivated by the Kabbalah? Like I'm kind of an intro to all of this stuff. So the Talmud and the Kabbalah, are those are two different books, and they're both intertwined with kind of their mindset?
Yeah.
What? But the Kabbalah is more of an esoteric type of thing, or no?
It has penetrated far beyond the extreme rabbinic tradition.
And then I was reading. Go ahead.
I think the Talmud actually contains these stories that indicate that really the extremely religious Orthodox Jews are actually polytheistic. There are all these demons and witches and wizards and whatnot that the Talmud describes, and apparently they're not. If you're a non-Jewish person, you're not supposed to know about this, and if you ask, they're allowed to lie. At least that's what I've heard. But I've read some commentary on the Talmud, and it seems to indicate that it's a description of a polytheistic religion, which of course Zionist people don't want to talk about, because officially, at least, Judaism is a monotheistic religion, worshiping Yahweh.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, something I didn't realize is the Rothschild wealth is like 2 centuries older than the Rockefellers. And so in that case, were the Rockefellers more of agents of the Rothschilds, or did they have they work together and they wanted to do something similar of kind of taking over the world?
I don't know how much of a mental overlap there was at the time that they got in cahoots. But I think the Jewish influence tends to permeate other organizations.
Well, something you had mentioned, we talked about maybe on the first or second time we had you on, was the protocols of the elders of Zion. But if you read through that, it's not much different from what the Rockefellers were all about, and so they seem scarily similar.
Yeah, I think basically they're accurate representations of intentions.
But looking at this is just on Wikipedia, so it doesn't really mean anything. But Ford seemed to be not into the Rothschild thing. So like these 1900s industrialists, like robber barons, was there was some distaste for kind of the Zionist approach, or no?
Yeah, I think essentialism is what they all develop in context and then reinforce each other's tendency in that direction.
And what does essentialism? What is that?
It's the idea that don't need empirical evidence to develop true knowledge of the world. Exactly what Chomsky did with the brain, treating it as a black box. They, for example, treat the history of an atom as not existing, of an essence fills in for the nature of atoms of a kind for all time, everywhere in the universe. This essence of what an atom is applies. So you don't want to look for the effect of time on individual atoms.
And so they reject something like that in favor of their they already have the knowledge in these ancient books. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and the reductionism is generally making that claim that we already know what chemical reactions are and what atoms are, and so if the organism is nothing but atoms, and atoms aren't to be investigated temporally, then we have essential knowledge of what an atom is and of what chemical reactions are. And so we ultimately, if we reduce the organism to atoms and reactions, we already know everything we need to know about the organism. It's all there if you practice reductionism.
And a little bit of a change of subject. Bill Gates, he talked about wanting to put vaccine, or he has a paper or something on putting vaccines in foods, putting vaccines in mosquitoes, blocking out the sun, et cetera, et cetera. Since he's trying to toxify the planet in every way imaginable, it got me thinking, do the elites even live here? I mean, this is actual conspiracy, but do they not, do they have something like underground or something? It's wild to think that he's, again, doing all these things and that he's, couldn't he be bit by one of his vaccine mosquitoes at some point and be killed?
No, I think he's just a true believer in complete essentialism that he doesn't see the meaning for himself.
And then who do you think? And he's obviously kind of or a true believer, and he's very rich. But is he an errand boy in some way of working for somebody bigger?
Yeah. Whoever has more money.
So maybe Jacob Rothschild.
Yeah. In fact, the way it works is that money rules, and so who has the most money is the one you should look to.
And the money, like the elites, they don't really care about money. It's just paying people to do evil stuff to fulfill their vision.
Yeah, except they think it's the humanistic, rationalistic, proper way to make a good world. The multiplication of human beings could fairly quickly kill the earth, but they don't take the rational approach, which is that as soon as a population is secure in their livelihood, the population of that area stops increasing and begins decreasing. So all they have to do is to control population growth is to enrich the poorest areas first.
Wasn't that Julian Simon's argument?
Yeah, the first person. When was he making the argument?
Maybe 70s, at the same time Paul Ehrlich was?
Yeah, the one that demonstrated statistically that raising the standard of living would reduce the population was the physiologist in Denver. Did some of the first free radical studies on cells. I can't think of his name right now.
He was a Renaissance man, though. Many different disciplines.
Yeah, and intelligent in all of them. And he just made it absolutely clear that every time it has happened that the population has risen above the starvation level, where increased children would increase their likelihood of surviving in old age. As soon as you don't need a big family, they stop producing them.
Unless Georgie has another question, move on.
I have a question on economics a little bit, and I know we're going to catch a lot of hate. But it's related to Marx and his theory of why capitalism seems to, or at least not capitalist, but like this, the modern state that we've been enjoying over the last 200 years, why it seems to ultimately always lead to wars and destruction. He calls it the tendency of the profit rate to decline. Are you familiar with that idea, Ray?
No.
So basically, Marx says that over time in a capitalist production mode society, basically the means of production of wealth becomes more and more capital intensive, and it tends to decrease the ratio of labor that goes as an input to producing the wealth, right? But if you're decreasing the rate of labor as part of the production process, ultimately the profit rate will decline because, according to Marx's theory, value is only produced by labor, by intelligent labor. So ultimately, as the capitalists are chasing more and more profit and making their the modes of production more and more capital intensive and shunning labor out, the profit rate for these capitalists, for the bourgeois, starts to decline, and they, basically ultimately that leads to conflict between them at the state level and then ultimately between states at the world level. So according to Marx, it's just the way the state is structured to produce wealth in a capitalist society ultimately is bound to lead to some sort of a violent conflict because, all this money that's in circulation usually has to be paid back with interest. And if the profit rate starts to drop below that interest, eventually you get into a situation that cannot be sustained and it leads to war. Are you familiar with his thought on that?
Not in detail, but he thought that process would lead automatically to socialism, and Lenin, his insight was that as long as you can keep developing colonies, including the whole world in the process, every time capitalism is failing, you have to open up new populations, new colonies, new markets. And so Lenin saw that imperialism was periodically, every time capitalism would have died, they expand and organize new markets. And so anti-imperialism becomes an essential opposition to capitalism.
Well, if there are no more colonies, because we live in a fairly developed world already, then ultimately that would have to lead to a conflict, because if capitalism fails in some country, there are no more colonies to exploit, then the only option that Marx said is to start the destruction of the wealth that was already produced inside of that country. And of course, guess whose wealth they're going to destroy? Not the wealth of the rich, but whatever wealth remains into the middle and the lower classes, so that they can usurp it at a pennies on the dollar and basically generate, yet another year of profit through desperate means.
I think Stalin's innovation was to try to placate the outside world by declaring socialism against world revolution, socialism in one country. And the problem was that the idea of world revolution was supported by the big imperialists, U.S., Germany, and Japan, all were secretly supporting Trotsky. And so the idea of world revolution is where the extreme anti-Stalin falsifications had to begin.
Okay.
Okay, I was going to move on. I have questions about World War I and World War II, but I think I'll save them maybe for next time. Ray, surviving the Great Reset, I think the cards are stacked against everybody, but we're talking about how grim things are and things like that. Is there anything you can think of? You've mentioned having a chicken or having a goat or having a cow and being able to produce your own food and that being the wealth currency of the future. Is there anything else you're doing to protect yourself or that you would recommend to other people to maybe get through the next few years because, things are rapidly changing?
In the short term, having storable food is logical, but because electricity is essential for ordinary living, they realize that you can't store perishable food in the freezer because they just have to turn off the electricity for a week at a time, and everything spoils.
I have a list here. Maybe you could add to it. UHT milk, honey, white sugar, canned oysters, canning salt, frozen. So this would not be good in the freezer. Not frozen meat, not frozen liver, Mexican Coke, coffee, powdered gelatin, powdered milk, applesauce with no additives, canned fruit without citric acid, baking soda. Is there anything else you can think of that would be good to obtain at the grocery store and stock up?
Ordinary granulated white sugar and ghee and coconut oil are intense calorie sources that are good for medium-term shutdown.
And that UHT milk, it says on the, at least the one I have, it says about 6 months. Can you go even longer on that, or does it?
Yeah. That's just basically so they can keep selling powdered milk.
So it doesn't expire?
The taste gradually deteriorates if it's exposed to oxygen, but if it's well sealed, I've had some 5-year-old powdered milk.
What is that? The same thing as like UHT in that Tetra Pak type of milk? Am I confusing the two?
I don't know what is in it.
But like powdered milk, the actual powder versus the type of milk that's in the cardboard, but it's next to the soy milk, like in the grocery store shelves.
I've never looked at that in detail. The ultra pasteurized milk, I've eaten it far beyond the expiration date and didn't notice the taste was any worse than when it's freshly made.
And George,
did you see the recent changes by the FDA in the food safety regulations? Because of they explained it that that they had to do it because of the pandemic, but now they're allowing vendors that are selling any kind of a prepackaged food to basically replace most of the ingredients as the vendor sees fit without changing the label. So in other words, some of the examples are you can be looking at like mayonnaise made with coconut oil. And those are pretty rare, but I'm just giving it as an example. And it says the ingredients are eggs, coconut oil, vinegar, etc. And then apparently the vendors are now allowed to replace the coconut oil with any other oil, which of course means they're going to put either cottonseed or canola oil with whatever's cheapest. And the eggs can be replaced with something of the same color as long as it basically meets the definition of having a consistency of an egg. So basically, how can we even trust the labels at this point in the store as far as the pandemic is concerned? I mean, I'm sure that, there are other issues with the labels, but right now it seems that pretty much anything goes when you're going to buy these things in the store. And I've already noticed a few products deteriorate drastically in quality.
Even 5 years ago, the Department of Agriculture was allowing horrible things to get bypass labeling requirements as processing agents, for example.
So things like I actually got some of the organic milk brands in Whole Foods that were giving me digestive issues, and I sent some samples to a lab that we work with, and they came back saying that these milks contained silica and gums, even though neither one of these was listed on the label.
Have you written anything about that?
I haven't written anything about that, but I called the vendor, and two of them refused to answer my question. They did pick up the phone, and the third vendor said, as long as the whatever ingredient is in there, as long as it's under I don't know what kind of a limit there is for each one of these ingredients, that he said that they're not required to report it on the label. Basically, if it's 1 gram, less than 1 gram per serving, I think is what he said.
I think it's important to get that information out.
Okay, understood. I'll see how I can do it without getting sued. I mean, I'll just say that it's the 3 or 4 major brands that are sold at the local Whole Foods, and they're only 5 or 6, so that should be enough for people.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's take our first question. Let me minimize the browser here. Okay, this one's from Anon about vaccines.
Hey, Danny, Georgie, and Dr. Peat. I love the show. Been listening to it for about 2 weeks.
Are you guys getting it all choppy and stuff?
Yes.
You can't hear that, right?
I couldn't understand a word of it.
Okay, either could I. Okay, I wonder if it's just that question. Let's try another one. Okay.
Hey, Danny. Hey, Ray. Hey, Georgie. I have a question about the aging process. I want to know, what would it take to stop aging and reverse the aging process and keep people in a perpetually youthful state? Like, what kind of therapies or medicine or technologies do we need to be able to achieve something like that? Thank you.
I think the basic process is epigenetic, and it involves small adaptations constantly to an improper environment for our type of organism. That if we can cause all of our adaptations to be directed by our central intention, what we feel ourselves to be and the need, aging could basically be stopped. The every little adjustment to stress leaves an epigenetic residue in the tissues, slowing metabolism, leaving the production of energy by oxygen consumption lower, while increasing glycolytic energy production. And the consequences of that are to gradually increase slowing proteins like heat shock protein, collagen, content of the connective tissues, and progressive lowering of the mitochondrial processes of each cell. The organism gets drier and drier, but the individual cells inside this dehydrating framework, the individual cells become more and more inflamed. And I think of running downhill as an example of an extreme example of the adjusting in the wrong direction. If you stretch a muscle under tension, that leaves damage behind, and it very quickly lowers the oxidative ability of the cell. But some Canadian exercise physiologists had old people do exclusively concentric exercise in which you don't have any adjustment to the forced extension of muscles. Our culture, I think, in effect, is forcing our organism to go ways that it really doesn't want to go. And that's like when you run downhill, the muscle under the force of gravity is being forced to shift to protect against that tearing effect on the muscle. And the muscle enlarges under those conditions, but it's more or less permanently changed. And according to those two exercise physiologists, that can be reversed by the special kind of contraction. But what we need is a general culture that emphasizes what's best for each person.
We're just surviving in this current situation. It's pretty much impossible to thrive, right?
Yeah. No effort is being made to make things better for everyone.
If an organism is depleted of PUFA, wouldn't the maladaptive process be much slower, or like much lower in terms of intensity?
Yeah. All kinds of experiments have demonstrated that PUFAs accelerate all of the bad processes.
A study just came out today, or at least I saw it today on my news feed, and they found out that simply blocking the prostaglandin E2 receptor basically fully reverses any signs of brain aging or any kind of neurodegenerative disease. And I thought, like, oh, wow, what a nice and politically convenient way to not implicate PUFA. They block the receptor of the prostaglandin, but immediately to the people knowledgeable of the situation, it means that without PUFA, there can be no brain aging. Does that apply, do you think, to every tissue and organ?
Yeah. The prostaglandin system is sort of the final amplifier of the stress, intensifying, amplifying function.
In terms of controlling the stress reaction, correct me if I'm wrong, but it starts at the hypothalamus, right?
Would be hypo what?
Hypothalamus, the part of the brain that releases things like CRH, the corticotropin hormone, and the thyroid, the TRH, the thyrotropin releasing hormone.
Yeah. The organism does its best to preserve itself in these bad circumstances.
But these several studies have shown that these peptides that the hypothalamus releases, like CRH and TRH, are highly inflammatory. And now several companies are trying to come up with like drugs to block either the release of them or block their receptors at the pituitary level or other tissues. Do you think there's any benefit in suppressing the reaction of the hypothalamus to stress, external stress?
Good conditions will do it. And thyroid supplements are one of the important things for keeping down the stress produced by TSH. There's now gradually increasing awareness that TSH is what causes the circulatory damage of hypothyroidism. That as the TSH goes up, the deterioration, atherosclerosis, everything contributing to hypertension is created by the TSH itself.
What about something like shining red light on the thyroid or the skull?
I think the whole body exposure to all of the good light is much better than just on the thyroid.
Yeah, I'm asking just because a lot of people are under lockdown right now, and if they can't afford to go outside, would this be like a close substitute until they're free to go outside?
I doubt that it really helps very much. Getting a thyroid supplement is the surest to work.
Great stuff. Okay, let's take. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Ray.
Say again?
Oh, I was just going to go to another question.
Oh, okay.
Okay, let me hide this. Let's try that one that skipped a little bit to see if it was. Oh no. It's still bad. Okay, sorry, Anon. I'll do your question next time. That last question was from Abraham. Thank you very much, Abraham. This one's from Oren.
Hello, Ray, Danny, Georgie. I was wondering if you could speak on your views of the history of philosophy. As a jumping off point, I think that the Hegelian idea that there's progress in history, that history always moves forward, and the post-Enlightenment rationalist project really lead us to where we are now with our current situation with technology and our current conception of man, and how that all ties in with the neo-Darwinist views on the human. I was wondering if you could speak about this, as well as how to correctly conceptualize the human organism, as I think that's vital for the health of any age.
I think the idea of intentionality is what governs the organism. And in philosophy, there is this big jump in which Edmund Husserl and Meinong, I forget his first name, were proposing that you should concentrate on the intentional processes in the brain, but around the same time, the idea of intention as the formative principle of the organism, that early 20th century embryology, for example, by splitting an early embryo into two or more parts, you would get two or more complete organisms, showing that it's not just a mechanical process, but there's an intention to become a certain sort of thing, and even considerably changing the conditions of development. Those fractions still contain the intention to become something, and every undesirable experience that the developing organism has is going to divert from its best intentions. And that whole process dates from about the beginning of the 20th century. And Meinong and Husserl were strong influences on Bertrand Russell, who gradually worked it out and moved towards a more empirical understanding of brought back a lot of the rationalist and hidden essentialism his idea of logical atoms, sort of semi-consciously incorporated the ideas of strict reductionist Darwinism with the implications of racism and imperialism and so on. But Bertrand Russell at least was able to conceptualize that that was an impossible system. At that point, he gave up philosophy, decided he wasn't up to the job because it always leads to the dead end of this anti-empiricism.
When I was reading about the Rockefellers and Rothschilds, Immanuel Kant came up a few times. Is that one of the undesirable philosophies for running the show?
Yeah. About 40 or 50 years ago, I wrote a little article that I've been able to find on the impact of Kantianism or neo-Kantianism on our culture. It starting about 1900 was one of the most evil but widespread influences. I told several people when I was in graduate school about my experience of criticizing neo-Kantianism and tending to get a B or C on the paper, but every time I found something good in neo-Kantianism, I always got an A on the paper, and a couple of people tried that. People who had been going along supporting neo-Kantianism got such reactions when they found something wrong with it that they were really annoyed with me.
I'm not an expert on it, but isn't it the idea of like collectivism over the individual? So that's kind of like an exact example of what the philosophy states. Like you're getting rejected because you're being kind of an individual.
I don't think so.
What is Kantianism?
Sort of the ultimate denial of empiricism.
Didn't even Kant, toward the end of his life, though, say that pure, rational, idealistic knowledge is impossible? We can never develop it, and it always has to be modified?
Yeah, but in practice, they always find a way to remain essentialist and rationalist.
I have a question about potential and intentionality. Would you say that the physical basis of intentionality in the human organism is a potential difference between the organism and the environment? So basically, the environment always kind of draws us forward because of across that gradient?
Yeah. And I think the degree of success that the organism finds in keeping its basic purpose, despite the slight deviations, that's what leads to delayed aging, among other things.
So this system that's basically prevents the intentional, intelligent action from humans by enslaving them in all these possible ways. That's one of the worst things you can do for the health of the organism, or really for its future, because you block the realization of its potential.
Yeah, leading to depression and cancer and heart disease.
Okay, we'll take another question. Let me hide this. Okay, this one's from Austin.
Hello, Danny and Ray. Thank you for doing these podcasts. I always learn a lot. I have a question about the biological processes surrounding vellus hairs turning to terminal hairs. As if you look at a baby, like a newborn, you can notice that they basically look like old men, where they have very thin, fine hairs on top of their head. and then at some point something kicks in, some process happens, and all of those hairs turn to very thick terminal hairs. So my question is it possible to do the same thing for people that are undergoing the reverse process of terminal hairs turning to vellus hairs, namely androgenic alopecia, or so-called androgenic alopecia? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, and obviously I'd love to apply anything you have to offer, because I'm dealing with alopecia, as you can see. But I notice I still do have lots of hair. It's just very small and thin, and so if there's some way I could turn those to terminal, that would be awesome. So I'd love to hear what you have to say. Thanks.
I've experimented several times with using DHEA in oil on the sides of my eyebrows that had gradually gone through aging and disappearance, and took about 6 months to create new dark normal hairs, where changing the color of topical copper solution the very next day, I could see the colored hair beginning at the base. But with in the case of lost hairs, it was a very slow process.
Speaking of the neonate, what exactly is going on in the hair growth process? Because people have pointed out that the neonate looks like has the normal horseshoe shape of baldness. And what is your take on that?
I don't know. I had never thought about that particular developmental process. I think the androgenic steroids such as DHEA are involved in thickening maturation of the normal head hairs and armpit and crotch hairs.
I think there's a difference between the hair type that the baby has and a balding person has. The baby has very low levels of androgens and very high levels of pregnenolone, at least based on the studies that I've seen, while the balding people tend to have high levels of estrogen and prolactin in the scalp. So both of these hormones, prolactin and estrogen, are known to thin and destroy the follicle and thin the hair, and they can actually make a very thick head of hair turn into a very thin mop of hair, like that of a very old person. So I wouldn't, just because they look similar, the hormonal underpinnings of both types of hair, I think, are very different. At least that's what I've seen in the studies. And I think the reason the babies don't have all that thick black hair is, relatively speaking, the low levels of the androgens. But the thinning of the hair in balding adults from what I've seen, is mostly driven by prolactin and estrogen and cortisol.
There have been some interesting studies on dogs. Certain dogs that became completely bald when their owners started supplementing estrogen, having it on their skin, and some in which it happened spontaneously without an estrogenized owner. The dog was found to have extremely high estrogen levels, which would involve high prolactin too.
Isn't a good indication that estrogen and prolactin are involved in hair loss the fact that most menopausal women start having serious problems with hair falling out, thinning, and in general, like weakness of the scalp and the follicles?
Yeah, the whole menopause supposed estrogen failure is a total fraud created by the industry to sell a product for which it didn't work. First, they prescribed it to prevent miscarriage, even after it had been demonstrated for several years to predictably cause miscarriage. Doctors at Harvard promoted the idea for the estrogen companies that supplementing estrogen would prevent premature delivery or miscarriage. And what they were doing was increasing the risk of miscarriage and profoundly damaging the mother and baby. The shift that happens, the first missed period involves the failure to form a corpus luteum, and estrogen stays at the same level. So at the transition, you're experiencing a sharp drop, almost absolute disappearance of progesterone, and the maintenance of estrogen. In rat studies, they actually bothered to measure what happens to the blood estrogen level when the ovaries are removed. And the few people who bothered testing it found that within a week, the body, which is normal recovery from surgery period, they found that the rats were right back to their normal estrogen level, but without progesterone. And my dissertation was basically based on the fact that sterility in the middle of the lifespan is caused by an unopposed estrogen. But the sales system of the drug companies has kept this myth going that there's a lack of estrogen at the menopause. My recent newsletter, I think it was, of temperature falls when progesterone isn't being produced adequately, and all of the symptoms of menopause can be produced by too much estrogen or too little progesterone.
Do you think there's a reason why all the studies with animals, and especially with humans, they always focus on this one type of estrogen, estradiol, as if it's the only type of estrogen that the body produces? I mean, there are other types, especially things like estrone and its sulfated form. There have been several studies lately which have called for endocrinology to evaluate its position on menopause, because those studies said, look, you guys only keep measuring estradiol, and we know it's going to be low because when the ovaries fail, most of the estradiol in the blood comes from the ovaries. But have you bothered measuring estrone sulfate, which can be easily converted into all of the other estrogens as needed? If you measure it in menopausal women, it is very, very high.
But the big failure, that's part of it, failing to recognize that stress, lack of progesterone, shifts the enzyme in the direction that every cell becomes able to convert by reduction estriol, or estrone into the 10 times more active estradiol. And the most important measurement that any of the estrogen researchers has made was that they were measuring the estrogen output of the ovary, and they wanted to control measuring the amount that appeared coming out of the ovary. They wanted to see how that compared with the circulating serum. So they took the vein coming out of the artery and compared the estrogen content to the vein coming out of one arm, and found that the arm was producing just as much estrogen as the ovary. And so the reason that removing the ovary from rats within a week, the estrogen was back to normal. The reason is that the whole body is always producing estrogen, and it's the whole body's stress-induced estrogen that has to be controlled for better health.
Last question, then we can move on. I saw maybe a back and forth with you and somebody about frontal fibrosing alopecia, and that's more common after menopause. Is that like maybe 50 or 70 years ago, a man would like gradually bald over a long period of time? Is the frontal fibrosing alopecia like a extreme inflammatory type of baldness, like very quickly, like after menopause, and that's why that's what's happening in the scalp there?
Yeah, and one of the things I included in my dissertation was the effect on the whole body collagen system, that estrogen is a major factor in shifting the balance of collagen production.
And you specifically identified PTH or in calcium and vitamin D as factors to protect against that, and of course, obviously, keeping the estrogen low.
Keeping the energy production up. Parathyroid hormone, aldosterone lead very strongly both to energy failure and to increased fibrosis of all the tissues.
Awesome. Okay, let me hide this browser real fast. Thank you so much, Ray. Sincerely appreciate it. Guys, give this episode a like, subscribe on BitChute, subscribe on Telegram, and I'll upload this episode immediately after we're done. I'll do the timestamps and everything. Sincere appreciation to Ray and Georgie for joining me tonight. You know, these episodes are always really special, and Ray, just an extreme amount of appreciation for you taking the time out of your day to join us. So let me go ahead and hide this. And this one's from Daniel.
Hey Danny, hey Ray, thanks for having me on today.
And
I just had a question about flare-up for Crohn's disease. Do you have any other recommendations besides glycine and collagen? Thanks so much for your time. I look forward to your answer.
You catch that, Ray?
What was the question?
It was about Crohn's disease. What?
Flare-up of
Crohn's, yeah.
Say it again.
Like a flare-up of Crohn's disease?
Undoubtedly, estrogen is going to be involved. I've, for about 45 years, been recommending both thyroid and progesterone, and everyone that has tried it, as far as I recall, has improved their symptoms.
What's happening there is that the estrogen like shifting the redox balance of the sensitive intestine, and that's causing inflammation?
Increased reduction is the same as failed oxidation.
I've seen a few other studies demonstrating that since estrogen is known to compromise the gut barrier, it allows bacteria to start invading the wall of the colon and the small intestine. And older studies demonstrated that you can actually put inflammatory bowel disease in remission by gonadectomizing the animals, and they thought this was because the androgens or the progesterone was removed depending on whether the animal was male or female. But subsequently, they administered androgens to the gonadectomized males or progesterone to the gonadectomized females, and they discovered that they stay in remission, which I think proves irrefutably that estrogen is the direct cause.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I wanted to mention about vitamin D. Apparently, there were studies in the 80s, not many, that treated Crohn's disease with a synthetic form of vitamin D, which was used only because it was profitable, but it still had the same effects as the regular vitamin D3 that we know about. And they were able to put Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis in remission by administering 100,000 units weekly. And I've had a few people comment saying that they tried putting 50,000 units weekly in their navel if it was dissolved in oil, and apparently it helped resolve a lot of their symptoms of inflammatory bowel disease. Do you think vitamin D is also involved, Ray?
Yeah, I think it is for sure effective taken orally. The things that reduce inflammation, cure all sorts of chronic diseases, and the symptoms of the pandemic so-called virus are quickly reduced or eliminated with all of these anti-inflammatory substances, which could be a dose of 50,000 or 100,000 orally of vitamin D. Just a single dose to get started is good. And progesterone and aspirin, everything that is a safe anti-inflammatory agent has been used against all of these diseases.
Ray, didn't you know vitamin D was toxic?
Yeah, I've heard that 1,000 times.
It's really gained popularity.
Have you seen any direct evidence of vitamin D's anti-estrogenic effects? I mean, there are some studies that talk about receptors, but I know you're not a fan of just the receptor effect. It's the whole cell that needs to be taken into account. Do you know of any studies that compare it?
The receptor is a good sign of deficiency of vitamin D. As you become deficient in the 25-hydroxycholecalciferol, you begin to produce both the receptor and the so-called active vitamin D 1,25 dihydroxycholecalciferol, and the part of the toxicity, people get very confused and fail to work out the ramifications of the so-called active vitamin D and receptor as being associated with a lot of toxic, harmful effects that are reduced by adequate calcium and the not active form of vitamin D.
I was reading...
It's actually active, but it isn't what they call active.
I was reading a few days ago about like calcitriol or 125 dihydroxy being associated with prolactin and growth hormone, so it certainly seems like the people advocating for that approach aren't considering these other things that you have plugged into your whole beautiful picture of physiology. Okay, so let me hide this. This one, we were just talking about digestion, so let me play this one from Will.
One other question. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
But what about the interaction of vitamin D3, cholecalciferol, with estrogen? They seem to oppose each other. Do you have any? Have you seen any studies or any experiments done that demonstrate this more directly?
Yeah, I can't think of the references right now, but I've seen good evidence of opposition of good vitamin D and calcium to the effects of estrogen.
Does intracellular calcium turn on aromatase?
Yeah. Excitation of the cell generally turns it on. Stress, tendency to be on the death pathway. That is part of the aging process, and it gradually increases the amount of estrogen coming out of your arms and legs and fat and other parts.
But a deficiency of dietary calcium also increases aromatase because it increases PTH, right?
Right. It like a deficiency of the good vitamin D, calcium deficiency, it increases stress and activates the whole system, angiotensin, aldosterone, parathyroid hormone, and estrogen.
Great stuff. Thank you, Georgie. Thank you, Ray. Okay, let me hide this. And this one is from, who was I going to play? Okay, this one's from Will.
Hi, Ray. Hi, Danny. I was wondering, for someone who has utilized the carrot salad, white button mushrooms, antibiotics, and other strategies, yet still has chronic endotoxin symptoms and low total cholesterol, what would be some good strategies to both lower those endotoxin symptoms as well as increase the total cholesterol?
Great care with what you eat is part of it. Anything that irritates your bowel is a risk. Finding the diet balance, sometimes you have to be fairly extreme to start improving the whole situation. Sometimes going to a strange, different form of fiber in your diet can help. Each one might not be right for a certain person, but usually by trying out different ones, you can find a dietary fiber that reduces inflammation.
What about like a bacteriophage or the erythromycin or penicillin or tetracycline?
All of those sometimes help.
Would you?
I have a question. I know you've spoken favorably of charcoal, but you've also cautioned against many products that are on the market because you think they may absorb into the bloodstream and cause an allergic reaction. Wouldn't combining the charcoal with the carrot salad reduce those risks while still allowing the charcoal to do its magic in the gut?
It does seem logical, but it's something I would prefer to leave to rat experiments because of the fact that any kind of unmetabolizable particle, if it gets persorbed, it basically kills off part of your whole system by blocking the smallest arteries.
Have you used charcoal yourself in the past, or have you found any brand that used to work in the past, even if not now?
I think I tried it once, but after thinking more about it and about persorption, I decided it was something I didn't want to keep trying on myself.
wouldn't overcooked mushrooms, if they're over grilled, contain a bit of a charcoal?
Probably a small amount.
Ray, do you still have confidence in fluorocyst or the bacteriophage?
I've used it several times, and some of the products I saw slight improvement, but nothing spectacular. So I haven't kept trying it.
And where would you place that as against something like Biosporin?
Biosporin can be very powerful because it's producing a broad spectrum antibiotic. The bacteria in it are producers of antibiotics.
And then there's an over-the-counter product called, I think it's called Megaspore Biotic. It's kind of expensive, but it does contain, I think, the B subtilis and the B licheniformis that the Biosporin has. Do you have any confidence in that?
I tried it once, and it didn't seem to work the same as Biosporin for me.
And the only bad part about Biosporin is very difficult to obtain, especially right now.
Yeah, and I think it contains a preservative from the smell of it. So when I used it, I would let it sit in a glass of milk at room temperature. Wait until there was a delicate coagulation of the whole glass, and then I would put that in the refrigerator and use only a spoonful of it per day. So the extreme dilution of the preservative wouldn't be a factor. That was how I always used it.
How long does it take for colon or for gut that has been sterilized by any means to get recolonized by bacteria?
It sometimes happens in a week, but sometimes people don't manage to get it.
Hey, Ray, I don't know.
The reason I'm asking is, hold on, I'm sorry. I'm asking because I've had a few people email me asking about replacing antibiotics with things like coconut oil. And I know you've said it can be irritating to the GI tract, which they seem to confirm, but those people reported it after eating a few tablespoons daily, they got loose stools, but after that they felt blissfully for like more than a week. Do you think that's due to the antibiotic effect of coconut oil?
Yeah, it's effective against both fungus and bacteria. But you have to make sure that you aren't allergic to it.
Hey, Ray, I don't know if there's anything you can do about it, but your volume, it goes from real low to really high. So I don't know if it's just we're at the phone placement. Anyways, okay, let's skip on here. Let me hide this, and we'll go to another question. Thank you so much, Ray. Thank you, Georgie, for making this possible. Sincerely appreciate it. Instead of waiting to the end of the show, Ray, why don't you let everybody know how they can subscribe to your newsletter?
The site for ordering it is Ray Peat's newsletter at gmail.com.
And that's $28 for 12 issues over 2 years.
Right.
And then they can order your books by contacting that same email, correct?
At the same address, yeah.
Awesome. And what are you working on right now?
Aging of the cell, following up things that were left out of last month on the effect of temperature. I concentrated on cold last time, and this one's going to concentrate on the energy deficit effects, which can be produced by heat stress or reductive stress or any kind of stress that goes with energy deprivation.
Well, I was listening with your maybe your last interview with Patrick Timpone, and you were saying the likely cause of many deaths is just the temperature getting too low. Is that right?
Yeah.
And it's totally not scientific to label a cause of death as COVID-19.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't bother checking the temperature of your mouth, eardrum, and extremities. Old people in particular can have their brain might be at a good temperature, oral 98.6, eardrum 99.5, for example. But they're producing less energy, and that shows up as an extreme gradient from the extremities to the brain area, and keeping that in mind, paying attention to the outside temperature, that can have a profound effect. The indoor temperature might be 70 degrees and seem perfectly safe, but even through ordinary insulated walls, the outside temperature can profoundly drain your body's energy-producing ability and create that gradient effect, and that means that your system is experiencing stress everywhere, even though the brain is maintaining its own temperature. It's also perceiving that the bulk of your body is being de-energized. That's because such a large percentage of our biological energy goes out as radiation. Something like 3/4 of the energy we produce goes out as microwaves and infrared. And so if it isn't reciprocated by returning radiation from something approaching body temperature, having an outside temperature of 45 degrees, for example, your body is draining vastly more energy than it would be in the summer with 80-degree weather.
That's why aspirin and a snack before bed and maybe progesterone and thyroid are so important right before you go to sleep.
Yeah.
I have a question about the cell aging. What do you think, Ray, is the main factor responsible for the hardening of that liquid crystal, which is what the cell is? Is it mostly lipofuscin, or are there other factors involved as well?
Yeah. Everything you can think of is involved.
Okay, let me go ahead.
Parathyroid hormone, for example, is very powerful, along with aldosterone, for example, and nitric oxide, collagen. Everything is shifting in a harmful way.
So it's an accumulation of some pathological proteins too, right? It's not just the fats and the iron, but proteins and collagen and things like that.
Yeah, intracellularly, you have things like the heat shock protein or the stress chaperone proteins. Those protective in some situations become part of the epigenetic damaging influence as they accumulate in the stressed cell itself.
Would in general reductive stress, even in a younger cell, also lead to a hardening in an electronic fashion, just because there's an excessive electrons that are not paired?
Yeah, but also by activating other changes such as the heat shock protein.
Great stuff. Okay, just a few more questions, Ray, and we'll let you go. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Sincerely appreciate it. Let me hide this. Okay, this one's from Brandon.
Hey, Danny. Hey, everyone. So I have a question for Ray regarding Koshodama, or sacred sound mantra practices, and how this top-down approach modulates stress hormones by toning the vagus nerve, and how adopting practices like this are a really good complement to all the biological understandings that I think Ray and all you guys bring forward. And just curious if he has a perspective on that, and or really any of you guys, and what other potential top-down approach might be suggested like that, like meditation, breath work, mantra practices, things of these nature. I don't know why I look over here all the time. It's the damn thing's over here. Yeah, sleep deprived. Anyway, love your guys' work, and just want you all to know all this free content you give makes a huge impact. My health is way better. My clients' health is way better, all because of this amazing content that you guys continue to produce. So I am greatly appreciative of everything. So I wish you all a groovy one, and I'll tune in for more shows, as always.
What do you think, Ray?
Shock is the extreme degree of most of these things we've been talking about. Estrogen, Hanseli was the first one to propose the idea that estrogen imitates the shock reaction. And I think that applies to many of the stimulating techniques of the vagus nerve. You have to be very watchful for estrogenic influences when you specifically stimulate the vagus.
Okay, we'll jump to another one. Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Ray. Let me hide this. Okay, this one's from Jake.
Hey, I had a quick question for Ray. So Ray, you had mentioned on a previous podcast that there's a possibility in the future of the Earth releasing a large amount of carbon dioxide, which could lead to kind of a planetary-wide shift in consciousness or thinking for the population. And I'm wondering two questions. So the first question is, with this kind of sudden increase in carbon dioxide, do you think that there's a possibility that there's an intelligence of the Earth that could sense kind of a crisis situation on the planet and initiate this rise in carbon dioxide globally? And my second question is, as a follow-up, what kind of indications, either biological or cultural indications, would suggest that this kind of event of increase in carbon dioxide is likely to happen at a certain point? Thanks. Bye.
I didn't catch the last part of it, but the first part, I think the Earth is basically doing the best things it can. Melting tundra ice is releasing huge amounts of carbon dioxide. And if the Earth is expanding, as some of the measurements over the last half century has suggested, an expanding Earth would be diluting the atmosphere resembling high altitude, even at lower altitudes. So an expanding Earth could improve our atmosphere, as well as the releasing more actual CO2 into the air. But what was the last part of the question?
I think it was something about carbon dioxide and what would that do culturally? Like a higher amount of, I might be misremembering.
Would it lead to a higher consciousness?
Yeah.
Yeah, that happens at high altitude when you see both acceleration and reduction of the stress hormones. T3 increases, cortisol doesn't increase at high altitude. And the brain metabolism, oxidative metabolism, increases with higher CO2. And that greater consumption of electrons, I think, is tending to keep the brain in a positive, productive, more conscious condition.
I have a kind of a goofy question, but it's been a long-standing interest of mine. Ray, what do you like? We seem to have been inundated with recent UFO news and disclosure, and no longer in the shadows. Pentagon's UFO unit will make some findings public. Could this, without me coloring the issue at all, what is your take on the general UFO agenda?
Trump threatened to declassify everything on it. I don't know if he left orders that weren't fulfilled, but I think it's something that should be completely open. But I think there is the risk that it, in a time of crisis, when a lot of us will be declared domestic terrorists for doubting Fauci, it will be a welcome distraction. Get people's minds off the critics.
Well, you mentioned David Sheehan a few times. Wasn't he like kind of a UFO guy? Like, so, I mean, what is your take? Like, clearly the news loves talking about UFOs, but they don't want to talk about 9/11 or bankers or other CIA or other actual problems. What is it purely an agenda for control? Like through there was that CIA Project Bluebeam, I think in the 90s.
Yeah,
is it some kind of tool in the oligarch toolbox of control?
It functions that way, but it's hard to tell whether it's just the silliness of the broadcasters and newspapers who know what they shouldn't write about. It's on the safe list, at least.
Could any of these events or crafts be really from extraterrestrial beings?
Yeah, it's a possibility, but I would give priority to all kinds of government fraud over actual evidence of aliens.
Imagine the fact that it's being released specifically now makes it that much more suspect.
Yeah, and at times it was clear that they were doing something that they created a very silly excuse for why people were seeing certain things when probably it was such as experimental luminous releases into the stratosphere as part of a weapons system. And so they had to disguise it, saying it was swamp gas or some natural phenomenon to avoid having to explain that it was some very interesting but secret military process.
Great stuff. Okay, thanks for that, Ray. The burning question of mine since I was a young lad. Okay, let me hide this. Okay, this one's from Nick.
Hey guys, big fan of the show. My question for Ray is, if the mechanism of MDMA is a big release of serotonin, flooding the brain with serotonin, and serotonin is a stress chemical, then why do people feel so happy and loving when they're on MDMA? I've read about it online, and it sounds like there's a little bit of dopamine and norepinephrine release, which maybe that would be what accounts for that. But it seems like, at least according to the mainstream view.
Sorry, go ahead, Ray.
What kind of DNA?
He's talking about MDMA, the drug, like the party drug that
ecstasy.
Ecstasy, yeah.
Obviously, it's releasing a lot of processes in the brain, and the fact that it damages the brain, I think the damage comes from the excess serotonin, but I would guess that the things that go along general overexcitation of the brain, I think that's where the good feeling comes in.
It's just kind of like a cultural cliche to say that, oh, this drug makes me happy, therefore it's increasing my serotonin.
Yeah, I think it's strictly a cliche.
I think it's a dose-dependent effect. Currently, MDMA is in clinical trials for post-traumatic stress disorder in soldiers. And they found out that really at very low doses, where you almost don't even get the psychotropic effect, it has a powerful antidepressant and anti-trauma effect. And the animal studies that were accompanying the human ones showed that this is tied to a large release of dopamine and a drop of cortisol. So my opinion is that MDMA is serotonergic, just like LSD, only if you abuse it in very high doses.
Ray, was this question difficult for you to hear on the phone? There's another part of it, but I can summarize it for you if you couldn't hear it.
No, I couldn't hear it exactly.
Actually, I don't know if I can summarize it. I think he was. Maybe George can listen to it and summarize it for you. Let me fast forward.
Like hostile and things like that. Why does MDMA seem to have the opposite?
Okay, that's
seem to have the opposite effect. My second question, if you're willing to do too, is: has Ray ever looked into Chinese medicine very much? The philosophy seems really similar.
Okay, I'll just stop right there. But it was about Chinese medicine being very similar to the Otto Warburg, Albert St. Georgi, your idea of energy and structure.
Yeah, I was very impressed by Joseph Needham's books on Chinese science and technology. He was such a good biochemist in England. He did a very objective survey and summary of Chinese philosophy and other sources I found very interesting. How the acupuncture can work, for example. I don't agree with any of the Western theories of what acupuncture is doing. I think the Korean theory that activates the movement of exosomes to restore tissues is so far the best theory.
Okay, we'll do one more, and then we'll call it a day. Again, Ray, thank you so much for taking your 2 hours out of your day to chat with us. Sincerely appreciate it. Okay, let me hide this browser, and this one's from Tim.
Hey, Danny and Ray.
Just realized this is probably really hard to understand, but we'll just go through it.
Little part where he was talking about physiology, and he talked about if you're not in the euphoric state, then there's something wrong with you. I'd love to know more about that. That's fascinating.
Did you catch that, Ray?
Not at all.
He's actually referencing one of our older podcasts where you said if you're not in the euphoric state, that means you're degenerating. And Tim was asking if you could expand on that.
Yeah. Things like carbon dioxide, adequate oxidation of glucose. These things should give you a 24-hour-a-day euphoria. And anything that interferes with this highly efficient energy production is amplifying damage, leading to permanent damage from inflammation. So when you aren't euphoric, you aren't metabolizing right.
And just to define euphoria for everyone?
That life feels good.
And maybe go ahead.
Feeling your breathing, feeling your heartbeat, and feeling the blood circulate through your tissues. All of that is background. All of it feels good, and so it gives a general tone to everything you're thinking and doing. That makes them feel good too.
And is it, I identify with that. There are times I'm excited to get to work and answer an email and things. Is it possible to maintain that feeling in the current situation? You've been aware of things and how they've been progressing for much longer than I have. But how do you maintain frame and euphoria when you know that, especially this last year and this year are going pretty miserably?
Yeah, and the common condition, doctors have been thinking of euphoria as something dangerous. If thyroid leads to euphoria, they'll tell you to stop taking it. Because they think of those good feelings as not quite compatible with life, and the whole business of living is this background of feeling your blood circulate and energy being produced. And if you ask a person to pay attention to their heart beating, they often get nervous. And first reaction when a person takes an exactly right dose of thyroid, one typical response was, thyroid is love, a feeling that radiates out of the chest. All of the good feeling nuclei throughout the body, all of these are intensified by thyroid, and your heart is one of the major emotion sensors. And if you're low in thyroid, then those same areas of your body that should be sensing the pleasure of living are reporting anxiety. People feel anxiety around their heart and chest, but the right response to it, getting the right dose, the experience of love is probably the best description to what the euphoria of metabolism is doing.
That's awesome. I'll let you go.
I have a question about carbon dioxide and euphoria. Since carbon dioxide improves metabolism and really leads to higher states of consciousness, shouldn't carbon dioxide produce similar effects to the psychedelic drugs like LSD or ayahuasca or whatever the shamanic people are using if inhaled in higher amounts? Are you aware of any studies that compare them in that way?
No.
Okay.
Just to follow up, one last question. You mentioned you had a tank of carbon dioxide next to you last time we talked, right? And I got like a dozen emails about how specifically you were using it. And so you want to share that info?
When the weather is so cold, I sometimes sit at the computer with my legs in a big plastic bag plumped up with carbon dioxide. And it helps to increase warmness.
I need to try that. Okay. Thank you for that, Ray. Parting words, Georgy Dinkov.
Just as usual, stay sane and stay healthy, I guess, because if things are getting more authoritarian, I think it will be harder for people to spend enough time watching their health. But it becomes that much more important.
And Ray, one more time, let everybody know how they can subscribe to your newsletter and obtain your books.
Ray Peat's newsletter, the S after the T is essential, at gmail.com.
Awesome. And I forget, we had a bunch of donations. Let me just read the names really quickly. I apologize. Marco, Marcelo for $20. Thank you so much, Marcelo. Helena for $20 Australian. Thank you so much. Muhammad for $4.99. Thank you so much, Muhammad. Harry Burgos for $50. Thank you so much, Harry. Sincerely appreciate it. Chris for $10, I think Australian. Thank you so much, Chris. KT for $19.99. Thank you so much, KT. Jean for $20. Thank you so much, Jean. Jan for $13.99 Canadian. Thank you so much, Jan. Ellie Z for $20. Thank you so much, Ellie. Janet Pack for $20. Thank you so much, Janet. Kana for 1,220 yen. Thank you so much, Kana. Carlos for $19.99. Wow, guys, amazing. Thank you so much, Carlos. Sincerely appreciate it. Michelle for $50. Wow. Thank you, Michelle. Gita Ag for $20. Thank you so much, Gita. Chris H for another $7.99 Australian. That's amazing, guys. I'm going to forward that right to Ray. Sincerely appreciate it. Ray, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Georgy Dinkov, thank you so much for joining us, as always. Guys, stay safe. See, we have an amazing viewership. We feel very fortunate to have such an engaged audience, small but engaged audience. So thank you, guys. Be safe. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you guys all soon. Take care, everybody.